This week, I want to talk about the power of words and symbols, and specifically about the symbol nothing or nothing, the negative in our language. In order to do so, we have to agree on some premises. I need you to agree with some stuff. So, can you think of a way that we could communicate as humans without symbols? I mean, words are symbols, pictures are symbols, gestures are symbolic. You can't even think without symbols. What language do you think in? Do you ever think in pictures? Language is symbolic. We create those symbols that we use, but also symbols create us. If you remember the communication model that I showed you a while back, we're created by the symbols that we trade with each other from the time that we're a baby. So humans, we're symbol traders. We trade symbols. And do we misuse them? Obviously. And here's one that I've never talked about, and that meaning is in people, not in words. This is I.A. Richards' addition, if you will, or contribution to communication theory. And Richards insisted that the meaning of any symbol is not in the symbol, but in the user of the symbol. So if I say dog, what color is it? If I ask you, I just say dog and then what color is it? What color pops into your mind of the dog? For me, it's yellow because I always had yellow labs. I'd like to remind you about the communication process, or re-describe the communication model to you that I described in an earlier lecture. We have an encoder and a decoder. The encoder makes up a message, sends it to the decoder, who then has to make sense out of the message. These messages are sent on communication channels. We have two kinds of communication channels, verbal and nonverbal. It's kind of the nice thing about the negative. You can always make two categories. When it's going both ways, we have feedback going on, those little arrows showing it's going both ways. It's important to remember that the communication process is a transactional process. The encoder is also a decoder, and the decoder is also an encoder in any communication situation. These blue circles, if you remember, are our frame of reference, our worldview, made up of our language, our culture, our religion, politics, all that kind of stuff, the way we see the world, all of our life's experiences. And where our frame of reference overlaps another person's, that's the area we have in common, or our area of commonality. The idea is the larger the area of commonality, the better the communication. If you remember the Tower of Babel story, their area of commonality was very large. And then noise interferes with communication. And we have two kinds of noise, external and internal. External, the sounds around us; internal, the what's going on inside of us. Internal noise has two kinds. Psychological, our thoughts and daydreams and all of that's going on. And physiological, our bodies, our butts are tired, our head hurts, that kind of thing. And then finally, all communication happens in a particular situation, or in communication jargon, a communication context. And so here's that mess we call the communication process. And I'd like to take everything on this page and create a symbol for it. So here we go. So I've taken everything that was on the previous page and turned it into a symbol. Students usually tell me this looks like bacon and eggs. So the next time you're at the International House of Pancakes, you look down at your plate and you can say, communication process. One student one time said it was boobs. Probably not a good thing to say, communication process at that point, but he's probably a weirdo anyway. So, but we create symbols all the time, and so I could draw a couple circles on the board in class, and you would know right away. With a couple squiggly lines, you'd say, "Oh, we're going to talk about the communication process." We call our communication process symbolic interaction. Humans trade symbols. And so everything in our lives has to do with symbolic interaction. It's going on all the time. If you remember, you cannot not communicate. You're communicating with yourself all the time, intrapersonal communication, even when you're dreaming. Humans are symbol traders. And so this slide is I.A. Richards' attempt to show that meaning is in people, not in words. And he had this in his textbook or something. And anyway, he has a user at the top, and he has solid lines between the user and the word or the symbol that they're using, and he has a solid line between the user and the thing, because I.A. Richard insisted that the user has a direct relationship with the symbol they're using, and he has a direct relationship with the thing or the referent, what the symbol refers to. If I'm holding a marker in my hand, I can have a relationship with my marker. It's my marker. It's my thing. But the dotted line between the thing and the symbol, I. Richard said, was an imputed relationship. It's imputed by the user. The marker doesn't know what marker is, and the word marker has no idea what a marker is. And that seems like, well, duh, kind of self-axiomatic truth. But there's a problem. A scholar in the mid-20th century came along, Kenneth Burke, and he said, Richard, you got a problem. Your model works fine for most symbols, but we have one symbol it doesn't work for. And if it's going to be a valid model, it has to work for all symbols. And so what's the one symbol it doesn't work for? It's nothing. You have a thing, and now you have no thing. We have to take out one whole side of the model. There's no thing. By definition, nothing has no thing. And so I want to talk about what the negative in our language does to us, what it does to our brains, what it does to our thinking. And so have you ever, I don't know, I sat around one time and thought about nothing for 3 days. I had written an undergraduate thesis at the University of Texas for the honors program, and in a history department, and the history department didn't like the paper. It was called The Words of Prophecy in the Story of the Nez Perce, and essentially the thesis was that the words of prophets control the subsequent history, and not a particularly popular concept. And so the committee, they wanted to, they gave me an A for the research portion of the thesis grade, but they only were going to give me a B for the paper itself because they didn't like it. But their recommendation at the end was that, well, if I just rewrite it and couch my argument in some sort of methodology. Rudolfo Rocha, the chair of the department, called it the musings of a medieval mind. And so anyway, being a nerd at the time, I wanted an A, so I wanted to find a methodology, and there was a communications scholar on the committee, George McLemore, and he said to me, Bruce, I got what you need. You need to read Kenneth Burke. And so I did. I read Burke's book, The Rhetoric of Motives. It didn't make any sense to me. It's like, you read a page and you get to the bottom of the page and you say to yourself, well, I must not have been paying attention. So you go back, you read the page again, and you get to the bottom and you go, I know I was paying attention that time. I just don't get it. That ever happened to you? Yeah, the whole book was that way for me. I called up Mecklemore. I said, George, I just finished The Rhetoric of Motives. I didn't understand any of it. He said, yeah, I know. I was immediately reminded of an old Bob Dylan song that says, a payphone was ringing, just about blew my mind when I picked it up and said, hello, this foot came through the line. That's what I wanted to do to George. But George said, come on over, I'll give you a book about Kenneth Burke. And so I went and got a book about Kenneth Burke. It didn't help me figure out his methodology, but it did tell me a lot about him. Found out he was a gypsy scholar. At least he called himself a gypsy scholar. He dropped out of college in his freshman year. And this is in the 1920s. He went to Greenwich Village in New York City to be part of the bohemian culture. They're like the beatniks or the hippies of the 1920s, the artists, the avant-garde artists. And he wrote poetry. In 1941, he published an article that, which was a critique, if you will, or a rhetorical analysis of Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. And in his article, Burke said Hitler's going to kill all the Jews in Europe. I have to realize this was like in the spring of 1941. The United States hadn't even entered the war yet. Pearl Harbor didn't happen until December. And nobody paid any attention because Burke was just a gypsy scholar, living, poet, weirdo. And so nobody paid much attention until 1945 when we went into the concentration camps and saw what had happened. And then somebody said, I guess it was a scholar from the University of Pittsburgh. I said, remember that guy who wrote that article? Back there in 41? Anyway, they tracked him down. They offered Burke a fellowship to come to grad school. Apparently didn't have to do an undergraduate work. He went straight to grad school. And Burke wrote in a poem one time that he was failing his course in advanced Burkeology. Apparently he had to take a course in himself, because by that time he'd written a bunch of books on communication. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about Kenneth Burke's thinking and this idea of nothing. By the way, Burke's grandson was Harry Chapin. I don't know if most of you are probably too young. Cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue, and that song. Anyway, they're both dead now. So anyway, days trying to think about nothing, trying to figure out what nothing was. I'd finally gotten to a book by Kenneth Burke called The Rhetoric of The Rhetoric of Religion. And the first, 2/3 of the book I didn't understand. It was a rhetorical critique of St. Augustine's Confessions. Hadn't read St. Augustine yet, so it just went over my head. But the last 3 chapters were a rhetorical analysis of the first 3 chapters of Genesis. And finally, Burke and I had an area of commonality. We were on common ground. I knew the book of Genesis, at least the first 3 chapters, by heart, and I saw it. You could understand Kenneth Burke. You could understand his methodology because it all boiled down to nothing, if you could just understand nothing. So I sat for 3 days thinking about nothing. My wife had asked me, what are you doing? Thinking. What are you thinking about? Nothing. I sat in my rocking chair thinking about nothing, trying to figure out what nothing was. You ever think about nothing? Well, of course we say that. What are you doing? Nothing. I can change the font, still nothing. I can language, it's still nothing. The idea here was, what if you sucked everything out of something? Then would you have nothing? So I made a space. Of course, probably the first thing you thought was National Geographic. So that's the power of symbols. They don't work that way. But if we sucked everything out of something, we'd have a vacuum. So we just still have space. And if you have space, then you have time. And, according to Einstein, space-time, we still have something. But the idea is, what are things made out of? Things are made out of what? Atoms? So we take all the atoms out of a space. We still have space, and space is a thing, I guess. I changed the font to Wingdings, and then somewhere along the line, I made this PowerPoint presentation many years ago, and somewhere along the line, the whole thing, the Wingdings started to evolve. I don't know what's happening to the binary code, but that N used to be a Wingding, and now it's evolved back into an N. I'm thinking over the years that maybe the whole no thing will evolve back into English. I don't know. Essentially what Burke said is, no thing only exists as a symbol. It has no referent. It only exists as a symbol. We have a symbol for something that doesn't exist. And Burke thought that was a little weird. It didn't coincide with I.A. Richards' thinking about symbols. And so Burke came up with a definition of what a human was. He worked on this definition of human for many years, and this was the last written version of his definition of human. And so, being bodies that learn language, thereby becoming wordlings, humans are the symbol-making, symbol-using, symbol-misusing animal, inventor of the negative, separated from our natural condition by instruments of our own making, goaded by the spirit of hierarchy, acquiring the foreknowledge of death, and rotten with perfection. And that's a short sentence for Kenneth Burke. It was nice of him to put it in a poetic stanza for it so that we can take it apart. But in order to understand this definition, I want to talk about definitions of human and Aristotelian rules for definitions. Aristotle had rules for definitions. I don't know, you should have encountered this in English 101. I don't know, if you wrote an essay of definition in English 101, you probably should have, at some point had an instructor tell you what the Aristotelian rules are for definitions. So here's Aristotle's definition of man, or of a human. He's a male chauvinist pig. In the Grecian world, that's the norm. So he uses the word man. And Aristotle said, if you're going to define something, give it a name. And so here we give it a name, man. And then Aristotle said, follow the name that you've given the thing you're going to define by the verb to be. So we have is. And then Aristotle said, put the thing you're naming, or that you're defining, and that you've just named, into a category. And Aristotle used animal. He said the category shouldn't be so broad that it doesn't say anything about the thing. So, man is creature. That would be too broad, according to Aristotle. I mean, so are bugs. It shouldn't be so narrow that it doesn't say anything about the thing that you're defining. Man is Homo sapien. All you said was humans are human, and so you didn't say anything. Aristotle chose animal. I might have chosen mammal to be a little more specific. I wouldn't have gone with primate. I think that would be too narrow. But because Aristotle used animal in definitions of humans, we've always used animals since then. And Aristotle thought that man is the rational animal, that we're the thinking animal. We put things in order and we try to make sense. Anthropology came along, and they said humans are the tool-using animal, that opposable thumb thing. Philosophy thinks that humans are moral animals. So did Mark Twain, by the way, used this kind of definition. And but Kenneth Burke thought that humans are the symbol-using animal. In Aristotelian definitions, you can follow your category with more characteristics of the animal, of what you're defining, in order of importance. So for Kenneth Burke, symbol using animal was the symbol using is the adjective before the category, what he thought was the most important characteristics. But Aristotle said you can follow after that, after animal, after the category, with other characteristics that you think are important in order of importance. And so that's Aristotelian rules of definition. And so Burke's definition here, he had this plaque on the wall of his office, and so give the thing a name. Woman is followed by the verb to be. I like this plaque. Who's putting the woo up there? That would be the woman. So Burke has captured the feminist movement here in this little symbol of the start of this definition. Woman is. And the most important characteristic, Burke thought, the symbol using, symbol making, symbol misusing animal. But then he continues in his definition with things he thinks are important. Inventor of the negative, or moralized by the negative. In his written definition, it didn't have or moralized by the negative, but here in this plaque it does. And so Burke also thinks humans are the moral animal, and that somehow the negative in our language is what causes us to be moral. And then he goes on, separated from his natural condition by instruments of his own making. Here we have anthropology's tool-using animal. I don't know, if we're separated from our natural condition by the tools that we have created and use, I don't know, I guess our natural condition then is naked in the forest. And then finally, goaded by the spirit of hierarchy or moved by the sense of order. This is Aristotelian rationality, symbolically represented in a very nice way. I mean, everything in order, in a hierarchy, in the right classification. That's very Aristotelian and very rational kind of way. I mean, if you study biology, your first course, you're going to study, genus, phylum, family, all that kind of, that kind of classification in order, and so rationality. And he ends his definition with "and rotten with perfection." We don't see acquiring the foreknowledge of death in his plaques here, and I'm not going to talk about it and rotten with perfection tonight. You can go ahead and try read Kenneth Burke and figure that out. Really, I'm interested in just the negative tonight. So if we look at Burke's order of importance, it's kind of the opposite of the slide that I had of the definitions. Symbol using is the most important. Moral animal, the next most important to Burke, then tool using, and then rational at the end. It's almost the opposite of the earlier slide. But this is the part of the definition that I want to concentrate on. Humans are the symbol using, symbol misusing, symbol creating to symbol making animal, inventor of the negative. And so I want to use Aristotelian rules of definition to define nothing. So put on your thinking caps now. Remember, Aristotle says if you're going to define something, give it a name and follow it by the verb to be. And so our frame of reference here is a noun frame of reference. In English is a noun-oriented language. The Worf-Sapir hypothesis states that the patterns of our thinking are determined by the language that we speak. And in English, nouns are fixed. So he runs, he kicked the dog, he picked his nose. He doesn't change. Action changes, but he is static. He never changes. And so in our frame of reference, our identity is kind of a fixed identity in the universe. Shakespeare said, "To be or not to be," right? And so we're in a noun frame of reference. Not all languages are like that. Navajo, for example, is more of a verb-oriented language. When the person changes what they're doing, their identity changes. In Athabascan languages, that's kind of true of a lot of Native American languages. When you think about them, they're a little bit more verb-oriented. When you take a Native American's name and translate it into English, oftentimes you get verb or you get action. Flying eagle, I don't know, dances with wolves, squatting dog, whatever. You get action kind of words. Chris Miller wrote a wonderful article about task identity. He insisted that before European contact, Native Americans, the idea of tribes was a European idea projected on to Native Americans. Part of the year might be salmon fishermen, and then they might be with a whole different group of people in the fall as buffalo hunters, and as their actions, as their tasks change, so did their identity and their collective identity. So anyway, we're going to be Aristotelian here. We're going to follow by the verb to be. So now we have to give nothing a name. So let's give nothing the easiest name we can, followed by the verb to be. It is. And so what is nothing? It is what? It's fairly simple. It's just not. And this works. This is a reasonable definition of nothing, according to Aristotelian rules anyway. It, a pronoun for the name, is not. It's just not. There's not anything there. There's nothing. I love physics tells us in the Big Bang theory that it all started with nothing, and then the singularity expanded and produced space, time, and the nuclear reactions that created the atoms that float around in the universe. But let's take the same idea and change our frame of reference from a noun frame to a verb frame of reference. So instead of to be or not to be, it's to do. And if we're in a verb orientation, in our action frame of reference, and so now we don't really have to say it does. We can conjugate verbs. We do it in Spanish. The Latin languages are a little bit more verb-oriented than English. I don't have to say yo soy. I can just say soy. The noun is encased in the verb. This is true of Native American languages too. That happens all the time. In Navajo, you'd have to conjugate nouns. So I don't have to say it does. I can just say do. I can put the it in the does and conjugate it to do. I'm not going to go into why do is weird in the English language. Other languages don't have this kind of symbol. That's a whole nother lecture. Recommend reading Our Bastard Tongue. I can't remember the author right off the top of my head, but a great discourse in that book about the word do in our language. Do what? Do not. Now, you can't do nothing. Remember, we've already decided that you cannot not communicate, so you can't do nothing. You can say you're doing nothing. Hey, what are you doing? Nothing. But you can say that, but you're not. You're still breathing, you're sitting, or whatever. And so you can't do nothing. But can you do a not? And if we change the do to Elizabethan English so that you recognize the phrase thou shalt not, and yes, we can do a not. I mean, how many of you out there have a thou shalt not? You know, something that you say, oh, I don't do that. Nope, I'm not going to do that. And then, have you ever done one? You ever do a not? You'll get this substance. How does that make you feel? So here's the formula. You start with nothing. Do something with nothing. Well, nothing only exists as a symbol, so the only thing you can do with nothing is trade it. We're symbol traders. And as you trade the symbol, the negative in our language, you will produce somewhere down the road the substance of guilt. Because guilt cannot exist without a not. You either have to do something you're not supposed to do, or not do something you're supposed to do, in order for the substance of guilt to exist. And guilt is a substance. It's a chemical reaction in your body. It'll kill you if you hang on to it long enough and wallow around in it. It's a chemical, you can feel it in your gut. It's a chemical reaction there. It's electrical synapses in your brain. It'll cause you to feel bad and ugly, that kind of thing. And so you started with nothing. There was nothing. You did something with it. You used the symbol. And that's why Kenneth Burke says we're moralized by the negative in our language. You can't have the substance of guilt without the negative in your language. And this is true of all human beings. This is why I believe there is an absolute truth. Certainly this is an absolute truth about humans. Doesn't matter what language you speak, there's a negative in it, and it produces this substance. All humans experience guilt in some form or another. Their moral code might be different, but we have a moral code that's produced by the negative in our language. And so what do we do with this substance that we call guilt? We can't hang on to it because it'll make us sick, it'll kill us, and stuff like that. And so we have to get rid of it. If you think about Adam and Eve's story, God tells them not to eat of the fruit of a particular tree. It's not an apple. It's in the story. He says, "Do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." Don't eat of that tree, because if you eat of it, you'll surely die. And so the serpent tricks Eve, or gets Eve to eat. Eve brings it to Adam. He eats, and they suddenly know they're naked, and they go off and hide in the forest and cover their nakedness up with fig leaves. I used to teach a 5-year-old Sunday school class where I'd tell the kids, the moral of the story is let God cover your hiney. God's as smart as a motorcycle rider. He knows if you try to go down the road of life wearing fig leaves on your motorcycle, pretty soon everybody will see your hiney. And if you fall down on your motorcycle, you're going to get road rash real bad. And so God went out and got Adam and Eve some leathers. He went and killed some animals and made clothes for them out of the animal skins. He made them leathers because he knew that they were going to go and fall down on the road of life now, and they wouldn't get road rash if they were wearing leather. A little silly, but if you're busy counting days in the book of Genesis, you're kind of missing the point. The point is about guilt and blame. The fruit of the tree is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And as soon as they ate that, they were embarrassed, they were ashamed, they had guilt. God, Kenneth Burke says that man is the inventor of the negative. In this story, I blame it on God. He's the one who had the not. He's the one who told them, do not eat. But with that not came guilt. and shame, and so they covered their nakedness, a metaphor for guilt and shame. And then what do you do with it? Well, in the story, God shows up. He says, "Hey, Adam, what about the fruit I told you not to eat? You've been doing. The woman you gave me," Adam points his finger at her, "she brought it to me." And goes, "Hey, Eve, what's going on with the fruit business?" And Eve, "The serpent." She's got that pointy finger of blame. "The serpent, he tricked me." And so we got to get rid of guilt. You can't hang on to it. And so who is it that we blame? We have a name for the person or the thing that gets the blame. We call it the scapegoat. And so here's the formula in its entirety. You start with nothing. You got a not in your language. Start with nothing. There's nothing there. You do something with the symbol, and you produce a substance of guilt, which results in the process of blaming and scapegoating. And where does that name scapegoat come from? It comes from those animals God killed to cover Adam and Eve's nakedness. Under Jewish law, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the high priest, would take 2 goats and lay his hands on the 2 goats and confess the sins of the people over the 2 goats. And 1 goat would get sent off into the wilderness, exiled into the wilderness, and the other goat would be sacrificed. A metaphor for there's only 2 things you can do to the scapegoat, the one who gets the blame: exile them or kill them. And if we think about Hitler's propaganda campaign, who was his scapegoat? The Jews. What did he do with them? He exiled them to Eastern Poland and killed them. We do the same thing every day. I mean, our most successful propaganda campaign is the anti-smoking campaign, and we've exiled smokers for making our air bad. First, we exiled them out of the buildings and into smoking areas, but then recently we've exiled them off of the campus. And so, we don't have to kill them because I guess they're killing themselves. But, this blame and scapegoat process is going on all the time. And just think about your own life. How much of your relationships with people are playing hot potato with guilt and blame? And if you understand this process, you can use it in public speaking. Certainly Hitler used it, but so did Martin Luther King Jr. We in the 1960s we called Martin Luther King the moral conscience of America. That's how he was introduced in the "I Have a Dream" speech. And the scapegoat for Dr. King was the government and the system. He didn't point to particular people, although certainly Southern sheriffs and the governor, George Wallace of Alabama, got the finger pointed at him from time to time by Dr. King. So he works guilt and redemption cycle. And so guilt comes, we have to do something with it. We can't hang on to it. We got to get rid of it. And so there's only 3 places that you can put the blame. There's only 3 possible scapegoats. Yourself. And if you blame yourself, well, then you got to do something to make it right. And so purification by mortification, make it right. Or you can blame somebody else or something else. So Burke called that victimage. Point the finger of the blame at someone. The only other possible thing is the circumstances. You can blame the circumstances. If you take a course in interpersonal communication, they're going to tell you use I language, and essentially they're going to tell you that if you want to resolve a conflict, try to keep the guilt and blame off of the other party that you're in conflict with and put it on the circumstances as much as possible. Anyway, once you're purified through that process of mortification or victimage, you're redeemed and you're clean. And so this is inherent to all humans, this whole cycle. And if you understand how embedded this is into the human psyche, people have used this to persuade for centuries now. And if you, in any communication situation, if you follow the guilt and the blame, you can find out something about it. You can probably control the situation, and it's an important understanding to have if you want to influence a lot of people, big crowds. I'm not a great lover of propaganda, but it's certainly the basis of propaganda, and but you can use it wisely. We can't avoid it. The process is constant, but if we're aware of it, we can at least use it or modify the communication so that it's as least destructive as possible. So finally, we started with nothing, the symbol. It only exists as a symbol, and that's the use of that symbol created something. And this is pretty profound. The idea that your use of symbols can create reality. That is a powerful idea. And it kind of flies in the face of I.A. Richards. Meaning is in people, not in words. There is something to do, something about symbols that as we use them, they can become creative. And when you think about the book of Genesis, how did God create the universe? And God said, let there be light, and there was. And God said, and if you read the book of Genesis, you'll see God saying things. The Gospel of John, the first chapter starts with, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word, translated word, is logos. If you remember my lecture on rhetoric, ethos, logos, and pathos, the organizing principle of the world, language is important. And we ought to pay more attention to what comes out of the hole under our mouth, because our use of symbols is creative. So I want you to understand the power of the negative in our language. It's extremely powerful, and I want you to realize that there's a strong possibility that symbols can create reality, and that the symbol, the thing that the symbol refers to, that imputed relationship that I.A. Richards talked about, might be a little stronger than just a dotted line. That maybe the symbol and the thing that it represents are what Kenneth Burke called consubstantial. They're of the same substance, which, if we could get into philosophy, we'd say that's very Platonic of you and that kind of thing. We won't go there. I just want you to understand that the words that you use and the symbols that we use are powerful. And sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, is one of the dumbest things that I've ever heard anybody say. Oh, thank you for today. In Canvas, follow the modules, and we'll have a discussion question on nothing, and hopefully I'll find a video that might that you can watch and have another discussion question. See you in class. Have a good day.